So in this tutorial, we're going to kick off using Tailwind CSS, JavaScript, and some neat mouse events to create a glow effect that's actually an extension of Tailwind itself. It's going to be a neat way to some built-in modern features of CSS masking. We'll be starting on it now. In this tutorial, we're going to cover a cool technique that's JavaScript mouse tracking that creates a glow effect. I'm using a simple demo here showing you what we're going to build. Think of it as like an informative site, and inside of it, as you hover over each card, I guess you'd call it, brand color is shown and kind of creates this really neat effect that's glowing, all based on your cursor effect with Tailwind. So we'll use Tailwind specifically for the CSS and create some new variants that are going to be called glow. And the glow effect you can add some similar to something you do like on a hover state or something. And we'll create some dynamic components using JavaScript that make this effect work, and some advanced CSS that's geared around masking that's kind of modern to the CSS world. All right, to get started, I'm going to first create a project, typically local projects like this where I'm demoing new features or effects in the CSS world. I'll do something static. If you've known me a while, I tend to reach for something full stack like Rails, Ruby on Rails. But in this case, I like Vite.js. So I'll go to that app and we'll get started creating a new scaffolded app using basic vanilla JS. I am using Bun these days. I did a video a little bit a while back about Bun. I'm finding it quite fast, so it's kind of kept up with me as far as being in my toolbox, I guess you call it. So this is the current project I'm demoing in. So it's called Tailwind Mouse Glow. I'll probably call it something else just so we have GitHub repo to reference. So in my root folder, my code folder, I'll go to there and clear that out. I'll do guide. It's essentially just bunx create Vite. So I'll run that, and you might need to install Bun on your end if you haven't already. In this case, I'll do, let's see, glow effect Tailwind, something like that. And it'll prompt you to choose a vanilla or Vue, React, whatever you prefer. I like vanilla, just simple JavaScript, no dependencies, whatever. And again, I didn't mention this, but I use Vite just because it kind of creates a lot of the stuff I need to create manually by default, and it's easier to add Tailwind CSS to. And you could use something like CodePen or something to do all this, but I'd rather use a non-CDN type of project to get this working, since we need to extend Tailwind just a bit. All right, so I'll cd into that project. I'll run bun install. It will install those dependencies, and then you could just run bun run dev or bun dev, whatever you prefer. That'll boot up your app, and it'll be a basic Vite starting point. And essentially, I'm going to get rid of all that stuff so we can start there with our VS Code install. And the index page, I'm going to remove the main app that they just pretty much inject all the JavaScript to. We'll call this glow effect Tailwind just to follow suit with the project name. I'll remove that bit. We can get rid of the counter.js. It's their demo logic. And the Vite SVG. I like to do this cleanup before I begin. Get rid of all the CSS for now. And the JavaScript SVG. So all we're left is the JavaScript main JavaScript file. We can delete everything in there except the import to style sheet. I'll just keep that as is. And we have a blank slate. If that was too fast, apologize. I just want to get to the breadth of this tutorial quickly. With Tailwind, of course, there are some dependencies. We can go to the Tailwind install guide and follow along there, or I kind of know it by heart now, but it's if we go to install and you go over to the framework guides, it might give you something that's related to Vite or whatever framework you're using if you're following along. I'll go ahead and run their guide. I'm not using any of these frameworks though, so we'll just install the dependencies for now. And I am going to install the Tailwind typography plugin when I install this, so I'll go ahead and add that now. So we'll say bun instead. We'll use bun instead of npm in their example. Bun install, I think, or bun add. I think it's like yarn. -d means it's a dev dependency, so we won't need this in our production environment or anything. These things get transpiled down or compiled down, whatever you want to call it. Tailwind CSS typography is the plugin that you can extend. And I use this. If you saw in our demo, there's it's gone now. The main typography that you saw, it just kind of does a kitchen sink style of it, so we don't have to spend time there. And hopefully all goes as well. There we go. You can see how fast Bun is when it installs that stuff. Next, we'll need to create the Tailwind config, and this will actually create a post CSS config as well, which we'll need. So we can extend the plugins. So we'll say bunx, it's just kind of like npm. So we'll say Tailwind CSS, and then it'll be init, and then the -p will kind of take care of the post CSS config. So you'll see it creates both of those. We get our Tailwind CSS config and our post CSS config. That ends up in the root of our project. Here's the defaults there. You don't need to do anything with the post CSS file. With the Tailwind config, we will extend this a bit. You will want to pass your content through so it can go through and run a purge process on it, so you're not rendering all of Tailwind CSS in your production environment. That would create your page load speed to be huge. So in our case, I'm just going to pass the index page to it. You would probably want to do something more along the lines of like an entire folder or something. There, I would check out the guides on how to do that. Here's an example if you really want to see. If you have any Tailwind that you get declared in your JavaScript, you might want to add that as well. In our case, we're going to have it just all in the HTML file in our index, so we shouldn't need to worry about that. Since we did add that plugin, I'm going to declare it here. We'll say require right there. It auto-completes for me. Thanks VS Code. And that should get us started. Finally, in our styles, to extend this login, we'll add the directives that you see here. So we'll paste those in. We should be good to go. And then our server should, I think, be booted already, and it should already kind of take shape. So if we were to go render maybe just a heading here just to verify it's working. It's text 4XL, font extra bold, text, I don't know, file. Let's see. Let's run our server once more, make sure it does what we want. Needed to reboot. And then other than that, we're set to go. So the main HTML structure of this page is going to be pretty simple. I'm going to actually copy some scripts over that will save us some time. It's essentially doing what we just did there and declaring a generic look and feel for the car that we have. Let's see. Looks like it's erroring out for some reason. Let's try that once more. Well, I meant to copy that. There we go. There we go. So now we have the general look and feel. Real quick, a link to this will have assets to our fish and everything else we'll use. So I've got 3 I got off of Unsplash. Again, this is stuff you could serve from a CDN or whatever. I'm just doing it locally to save us some time. But here's the first fish, just to show you by example. There's no effect yet, but this is the general card. It is responsive, so as you go down to a smaller viewport, you'll see a design kind of adapt, and that's pretty neat. Simple stuff that's Tailwind oriented. So the main thing you'll want to notice and take notice of is we do have some custom classes here. One called Glow Capture, and another will be called, I think, just Glow that we add. So I'll add that coming up just to get effect in place, but here is the overlay we'll actually add as well. And this is important because it's going to be what's essentially creating that glowing effect under the hood. And real quick, I'll add what that actually is here. And we won't be able to see it because it's going to be a mask. So there'll be some JavaScript that's required to make it really make sense. We're going to declare a CSS variable called glow size. And it's going to be within the contents of that class. And we'll call it something huge, so it's real big. And then we'll absolutely position this. And you could use Tailwind here for some of these things. I went with traditional CSS to make it simple. So inset 0, pointer events. If you want to make it clickable, I mean, you could remove this. I just did for now for the effect and the demo. And then user select none. And then we'll set an opacity setting. This will be dynamically changed when we do the JavaScript portion coming up. And we'll say glow opacity, which will be set dynamically of 0. We'll set that, and the fallback will be 0. Excuse me. So you can set 2 there. And then the kicker here is the max. So we'll add that, and then you can actually have a radial gradient, which is kind of new. I kind of really didn't use this before having known about it. And we'll set this, again, to be dynamic based on your mouse state. So we'll say glow size, and then you can pass in another. That gives us the ability to determine the main radial gradient sizes and where they're at on the X and Y spectrum. So then we can go and say glow color, which 1%, and then transparent will be 50%, and that will be that entire line there. So if you want to check out what mask or radial gradient, you can look at MDN. There's like a big schema of how it all works. It kind of does this crazy stuff. You can change pretty much anything under the sun and dictate where the gradient starts, ends, how it scales, all those things. We can make a transition effect on this so it's kind of fluid as you move. So 4 milliseconds will target our actual mask and then set ease. And then finally, we'll target the mask. It gives the browser kind of an incentive to know what's going to actually be manipulated. So with that out of the way, that kind of gives us the groundwork to extend Tailwind. So what I'll do there is actually go and create a new variant in our plugins array here. And you can actually go about this in a few ways. You could export and import a custom plugin just like we do with Tailwind typography, or you could do it all online. It's a little more yucky to look at, but it works all the same since it's so simple based on what we need. So say const plugin equals require. This is part of Tailwind, so you can require it anytime. And we'll say Tailwind CSS plugin. And I'm going to go back to our main page here. We can go and add that plugin now. My formatter just redid this, but we'll change it to require Tailwind typography, and then we can create a new instance of plugin, essentially defining a plugin on the fly here. So we'll say function, and then within that we can add the add variant destructure and open that function up, and we'll say add variant, and we'll call this glow. And this is how we're going to be able to use new classes called glow in our apps. So when the glow effect is enabled, you can do the variants on it. And then we'll pass glow capture. And remember, if you saw that class on the main card component, this is kind of necessary. It's going to look for this. And then the glow overlay. And then there'll be this ampersand sign that is a placeholder. That gives us the plugin starting point. Within that, we can add one more option. That's going to be the theme, how it extends a theme. So we'll say theme, extend, colors, glow. That's that new extension there. We're adding the variant. Here's how we're applying the variant. And it'll be a color mix. Again, you might want to look that one up. This is all kind of a little more advanced, so color mix, but it's a really cool effect. It takes 2 color values and returns the result of mixing them in a given color space by a given amount. So if that's not confusing, you know, it's like essentially doing math with CSS, which, hey, here we are. So pass in sRGB. That's like a type of color you can pass right here. So then within that, we'll add the properties that are going to be based on our CSS variables. We'll start with that, and it'll be calc after that. Inside of that, we will add alpha value. It's part of Tailwind you can kind of hook into. It gives you the ability to use your transparency values in the class names. And we'll multiply it by 100% %. After that, we'll fall back to transparent. I think that's the most complicated part, is adding the CSS and extending Tailwind. Let's go ahead and create our JavaScript, and then I'll go back and add all the markups so we can extend it so it's essentially reusable based on the color we passed. So here we're defining that glow color, and then the other CSS variables we define, like glow size, all of those get determined by our JavaScript. So I'll show you that next. I'm going to use regular JavaScript. You can reach for something else if you prefer. So with Vite and vanilla JavaScript, there's really no reason not to. So document, add event listener, DOM content loaded. And then I'll add a function around that event. We'll go and get all of those capture divs, so that we'll call it const captures equals document.query selector all. And then we'll say capture, glow capture, excuse me. Log this out just so we can see. I'll open up my console here, and we have a node list of 1. So we've got 1 in the DOM. That's essentially this, and that's because it's got the classless glow capture wrapping it. Cool. Okay, so with that out of the way, our JavaScript's working. Everything's great. So we want to actually loop through all of the ones on the page. I mean, you could do, if you're going to have this on multiple pages, you might want to do captures length. Assuming there's none on the page, you don't want this JavaScript to fire. So we'll do that. And then captures for each capture, and I can't spell capture. We'll loop through each, and then here's where all the magic happens. We'll say we're going to clone the child element. So we'll take the const, we'll say cloned child, and it'll actually be capture, the instance of capture children, and we'll get the first one, and we'll clone node, which is built into JavaScript, essentially just doubling it. We'll say true in the DOM, so it creates it twice in the DOM. Then on that overlay container, if you remember, that's our div right here. It's got that class glow overlay. We're going to call it overlay and set it equal to capture.query selector glow overlay. Pretty simple. For each capture, again, spelling is not my strength here. There we go. Now we can say overlay. We want to append that clone child. And we'll pass in cloned child there. That essentially creates it in the DOM within the clone, the overlay, I mean. So we'll say append to cloned child. Okay. Append cloned child to overlay. Got it. Now we'll take the capture element, add event listener, and we'll say mouse move. And on that, we'll listen for the event and perform some functions that set some variables for us, the CSS variables, if you recall. So we need the x and y axis. So we'll say const x equals event.pagex equal or minus capture dot offset left. And then we'll do it for y as well, event.pagey minus capture offset top. And then we'll say overlay. This is how you set a CSS variable essentially with JavaScript. So we'll say glowx is going to equal a interpolated x variable, pix. So we'll use pixels as the measure or unit, and we'll do the same again for y. Finally, one more, we want to set low opacity, and that will just be 1. Because if you recall, it'll start at 0 if you look back at our glow opacity here. So we'll default back to that 0 if it's not set. Great. So those are our starting point to make the dynamic thing happen. And then finally on the capture, we want to add an event listener if you mouse out or leave. Do the similar thing. So on the event, we will set the style property of glow opacity back to 0. So we'll just essentially take this, do that, and we'll make it 0. Okay. Now if you look now, nothing's really happening, but you can see a little effect here, and that's because we just haven't set glow properties in the actual HTML yet. But if you look in your browser and look in the element, you'll see the things are all moving based on your mouse event. So that's pretty cool, pretty wild at the same time. And what we'll do next is add those classes back. I'll go back to the main container here. We have that glow capture class. Within that is the main card component, and that's where it's going to be the most compelling thing to see. So I'll go back and add that now. So maybe we could start with the text just to give you an idea. So on here, we'll say that glow class we have access. We can say text glow is the actual color. Because it's dynamic, we'll actually be feeding the color right here. So whatever we declare there is going to be the color. So it's kind of a once and done color as opposed to the scaling color scales they do with Tailwind by default. And we'll set this to an opacity. So now you'll have this kind of purpley look. So that's pretty great. Now on the card is where it's going to get really obvious when something's changing here. So we'll go back and add that. We'll start with the glow class. And then we'll say glow, ring 1, glow, border glow. Essentially setting that color, if you can think about it that way. And then glow, ring glow, setting the green color to the glow color. And then finally glow, BG glow. And we'll set it to a similar transparency as we did below. So now we get that purple effect. And that's all relative to the color you chose here. So whatever this is, it would change to that. So that's how you can make it dynamic. So let's do one step further and make the little border around our fish dynamic. I'll do that next. Pretty much follow suit. We'll say glow, ring 1, glow, border, glow, glow, ring, glow. Okay, so now when we go over there, we get that effect on that kind of that transparent property. And it's shining through essentially because when I initially set up the card, it's going to have a transparent border by default. So I have a white border here that's just got tiny bits of transparency, which is kind of nice. That's one little thing to mention that I should mention that would make the effect a little more prominent when you're doing this. Next, we can do the button class just to show you by example. We'll follow a similar pattern. So the glow ring 1, and then we'll say glow border glow. Finally, glow ring glow. Okay, now we get that effect on the button. Pretty sweet. So what I'm going to do is copy my project back from the original project just to save us some time. We're already a half hour in, so I didn't want to go crazy here. So I copied that original project. I've basically it ended up being 2 additional fish cards, and we've changed the copy. Notice we have the pros classes here. Those are all relative to that typography plugin we installed with Tailwind. And then finally on the back end, I added a slight background style in our original CSS. I forgot to add that before. It's not really a big deal if you add it since the background's very dark, but I do a background image that pulls in the underwater image here. And if you were to remove this blend overlay class, you'll see it's really vibrant, but I wanted it to be very opaque and dark. So it's kind of there, but also kind of not. So effectively, we've got 2 more fish with our banana wrasse, I think it's called here. And we've defined different colors for each. So you get this cool effect underneath. Now, one gotcha with this is when you're trying to make anything around this, like have a big shadow or something overflow, when you hover over it, you're going to run into issues because if we were to transform this and say, maybe on hover, we'll transform hover scale 105. You'll see some bad effects happen here. Maybe not. Oh, it's on fish 3. Okay. Like you see that? And that's all relative because we're literally cloning the element with JavaScript. So you can't quite do everything you want with the Tailwinds out of the equation. But if you can live with it without having to have giant drop shadows or maybe skewing the card as you hover over it, you'll see how far you can get. One thing you can take a look at is when we're in the glow effect, you see the whole element. There's nothing in this div when we first started, but with the JavaScript in play, you're seeing it being injected. So we're getting a copy of the card and being put in there. Then that mask and all that stuff's being applied over top of it. So you're effectively seeing almost like magic happen in real time, even though it's just an effect that you can add that's very dynamic and cool looking. So hopefully this was helpful. I'll add this to the GitHub repo and have a link to it in the blog post and the video below. You'll see in the description. If you found this useful, it'd be great to get your subscription to the channel or a like to the video. I'd appreciate it a lot. If you want to see more stuff like this, let me know in the comments.